Hey y'all, it's Laura. Welcome back to another Cocoa Vanilla Studio layout. This one is using these stars from the Legendary Collection and a whole bunch of scraps. Now I had these beautiful stars in my collection still left. These are from the ephemera pack, and I decided to make them the focal point of this layout. Now I have two photos over here of my boys. One is of my middle son Joseph, and one is of both of them, my oldest Alex and Joseph, and they are from his birthday. And Joseph turned 13 in 2022, and so my oldest son, who is 18, offered to take him out to his favorite Mexican restaurant for his birthday. Little did my son know, Alex had a plan for this birthday excursion, and he told the waiter that it was Joseph's birthday, and so of course they put the big sombrero on his head and they sang happy birthday to him. And he was less than thrilled. Joseph is a pretty introverted person, and so he was not thrilled with that part. But because his hair was all down in his face while he was trying to hide, they didn't splash the whipped cream in his face, which is something they apparently do. I have never seen that in person, I don't think, where they pop a little bit of whipped cream on your nose or something after they sing to you, but apparently that's a thing. And he didn't get that done because he had his hair in his face, and the waitress was afraid to get it in his hair. So I appreciated her not doing that. He would have been even more annoyed by that, to be fair. And so he's not having a great time with that part, but he did have a good lunch, and they did get to sit and talk and chat for a while, which is hard when you are the middle child, you know. You're not the oldest, so you don't get to do all the new things first, and you're not the youngest, so you don't get all the extra attention. But the middle child in our house generally means that Joseph is my quiet kiddo, and he tends to come in and sit with me and just chat. And we just chat, we just talk, and we just hang out sometimes, and it's kind of nice. But yeah, that is what these photos are from his birthday, and I thought nice star diagonal layout was a good way to celebrate a birthday. I am using this little inside piece from a frame in the ephemera pack, and I thought, what if I just sort of tucked it behind my photos and used it to frame out some journaling? And this turned out really cool. And it was just kind of an experiment on my part. I just wanted to see if it would work. And it did work, and it was really fun. So one of the things I did, besides making a giant mess of the fuzzy cut stars that I had left over from this collection, is I decided to cut off the offcut pieces that would have been hidden behind my photos, and I'm going to tuck those in around the top and give the appearance of having extra stars, as though I have even more stars tucked behind these photos when really I just have the 4. So it's a little visual trickery happening there, but I think it turned out pretty cool in the end. Now, the reason that I love doing this sort of diagonal design, this is one that I've done quite a bit in the past and haven't done recently, but really enjoy, is you can have a bit of fun with shapes. And I quite often do this with stars, with circles, with hearts, with hexagons. And it is one of my favorite designs to play with, this diagonal design. In addition to being diagonal, it does tend to turn out kind of a little scattered. So we have some shapes kind of randomly set across the page, and then I'll come in with some smaller versions of those shapes and kind of sprinkle it in around the larger shapes to fill in the gaps. Now, if you're doing this kind of design, I would strongly recommend you start with your largest shapes first. You want to take them off of the page, even if it's just a little bit. So as you can see down there at the bottom, my little star is going to, just a corner of it, pop off of the page. And I'm going to have some smaller stars also popping off of the page. And that gives it a look of continuous from top to bottom. And this is a little bit more interesting than a shape that just stops and it just barely hits the edge. You really want it to go off of the edge, to just continuously look like it's just flying across the page. It's just a little detail that I think makes a big difference personally. So now, as you can see with this second photo, I'm doing the same thing. I just stuck it on with one of the pieces of tape so that I could cut off that other section, and I'm going to arrange that in another spot on the layout so that it looks like there are more stars in the background of these photos than there actually are. It's a great way to get the biggest bang for your buck when you only have a limited number of supplies, or in this case, just a limited number of this particular size and shape. Now, as you'll see, when I come in with my tiny little punched and fussy cut stars and fill in the gaps, you can definitely make it look like you have so much more going on with those smaller shapes added in. Now, one of the things that I discovered while doing this particular layout is that it's very fun to set these up, but I really like it when the photos are on a bit of an angle. And I did initially try to keep them sort of straight up and down, and I didn't like it. I didn't feel like it really worked out well for me. So putting them on a bit of an angle helps them to climb up with the stars and kind of follow the shape of the star. So as you can see, that top star is also just barely off of the page. Now that I have my large stars in place, I'm going to come in with the medium stars. So the next size down, I'm going to go in first. And why is that? Because it's much easier to fill in gaps with smaller and smaller stars than it is to try to fit larger stars in amidst smaller ones that you've already scattered around. So I would really recommend going with the big first, then the medium, then the small. And I'm doing a little bit of experimentation here. I didn't really have a plan beyond getting these stars onto a page. Now, a couple of things about the titles. Looking at it back now, it could have worked just this way, and part of me kind of wishes I had done it this way, but in person, for some reason, this title felt really disjointed, and I end up just going ahead and putting it together. Now, it did work at the top. It works just fine at the top, especially because there is so much space at the top of this right photo, but I think it could have worked at the bottom too, and I think I should have tried it. I should have left it there and let them be best buddies, split up amid the photos that way. But it does work this way too. I think one of the reasons that I decided to keep the title together was because I already felt like the two photos were a little bit disjointed because they're obviously taken in very different places. One of them is outside of my son's car, and the two boys were standing next to each other, and that was just me running outside and let me take a picture before they left. And then the top photo is one that Alex took for me at my request when they got to the restaurant. Now, I didn't know he was going to ask them to sing, so that bit was a surprise. The sombrero, the whole thing was a bit of a surprise for me as well. And the fact that Joseph went along with it is kind of a surprise, to be honest. But he did, and I think it turned out really fun, and I think it's a memory that he has to hold on to. He and his brother do play pranks on each other quite a bit, especially around the 1st of April, which is a jokey holiday here in the United States. I don't know if that's something that is celebrated elsewhere, but it's April Fool's Day here in the United States on April 1st, and they almost always prank each other. So this really shouldn't have been a surprise that his brother would pull this, but it was. I definitely think it caught Joseph off guard, but they did have a really good time, and I think he would let him he would go again. So it couldn't have been too bad. Now I've got my larger stars in place. I'm bringing in these smaller stars. Now again, these are a mix of punched scraps and some teeny tiny stars from the smaller paper pads and the larger papers that I have fussy cut out. So this collection already had a lot of star imagery in it, and I went ahead and fussy cut some of it out and punched out some scraps, and this is a great way to use them up. So quite often you'll hear me talk about punching out scraps, and I've had questions. How do you use up all those little punch shapes? This is how. These kind of heavily geometric layouts that are filled with one specific shape are a great way to use up those scraps. So even if you don't punch them out preemptively, you can grab a handful of scraps, which I also did for this particular layout, and punch out some shapes and have a bit of fun, use up some scraps, and get them onto a page in a new and a different way than maybe you normally use your pattern paper. Now, our title, Best Buddies, I thought fit perfectly for these two. They are the best of friends. It is very, very sweet, the relationship that they have. And even though there is a fairly large age gap between the two of them, they get along beautifully. They share the biggest bedroom in the house, and they are the only ones in the house that share a bedroom because they just get along and they really, really enjoy each other's company. They're very good pairing for friendship, you know, like they just have the perfect personalities to be really good friends, and so it works out quite nicely. My oldest son is very extroverted and he's very outgoing, and he's a little loud and a little wild in his personality. And then Joseph is a bit more quiet, keeps to himself, very logical, very intelligent. They're both very intelligent boys, but he's just the very opposite to his brother, and yet somehow it works. You know, you ever see those friend pairs where you're like, how are they friends with each other? They're complete opposites. That's these two. They are completely opposite of each other, and yet they get along famously. Love to see it. So now that I've got all of my stars in place, I'm going to come back in with some enamel dots, and these are also from the Legendary Collection, and just tucking in the big ones behind the word phrases and behind the larger stars is a great way to get those bigger ones on the page without having to give them so much presence, because sometimes the larger ones can feel a little tricky to use, and that's how I use them, is I just tuck them behind other things, or I make them the focal point and put them in the middle of the stars or the middle of the flowers and give them a purpose. So now that I've added on my little enamel dots, and I pretty much used up that pack on that layout, just finishing off the packs. That was great. Coming in with my T-square ruler, which I didn't really need to be a T-square ruler. It could be any ruler, to add in my journaling lines here in my little cutout areas. And yeah, these turned out really cool. I love these little journaling spots. I think this worked out beautifully, and I definitely will try that again with frames in the future. And this would have worked with any kind of a frame, adding just half of it behind the photo, and it gave me a little spot to add some journaling lines amidst a fairly busy background. So I really like how that turned out as well. Now, in addition, with a scattered layout like this that feels kind of busy, I do tend to add a hand-drawn border. Now, in this case, it is going to kind of go behind my stars, so I probably should have added this first, because I knew I was going to. It's pretty typical for me with this sort of layout to do a border, but I didn't, and it's fine because I can just go around the stars a little bit. And it also, for me, makes it a little bit better to have the stars overlapping this line, and I think that it just looks kind of cool, and it gives it a very finished look to the layout. Now, I will go back and trim off these little overlapping star pieces in just a minute, but I'm adding a little bit of faux stitching with some scribbly lines in a few spots just to make it more interesting. I did go back and outline those big gray stars with my gel pen to give them just a little bit of shadowing, and then popped in with my scattering and splattering. Scattering not as much needed, but I did use some enamel dots. Splattering I do in two phases, one with the Nuvo drops, this time in gold, and then with some gold ink spray for some uncontrolled splattering around the outside of my clusters. That's it for this one, guys. I hope you enjoyed it. Let me know what you think in the comments below, and be sure to check out the Coco Vanilla blog at cocovanilla.com.au. Until next time, bye y'all.